Hello again, everyone. Tonight's story follows Inez, a sharp investigator forced to shelter Renata, the girl who once ruined her after she arrives bleeding at midnight with evidence against her crime lord father. What begins as danger turns into a brutal, tender fight for truth, survival, and forgiveness. Renata Kane arrived at my door at 12:17 on a Thursday night, soaked through, bleeding through the sleeve of an expensive black coat and looking nothing like the girl who had once made an entire school hallway shift around her like she owned the air. I knew the time because I had been staring at a spreadsheet for 6 straight hours, trying to prove that a nonprofit for youth athletics was not a nonprofit at all, but a polite drainpipe for municipal bribes. Numbers had always comforted me because numbers did not pretend to be innocent. People did. Rain lashed the windows of my fourth-floor apartment, the radiator clanked, and the knock came again. 3 sharp taps, a pause, then 2 more. When I looked through the peephole, the past did not return gently. It kicked the door in. Renata stood in the hallway with one eye swollen, mascara washed into shadows beneath it, blood diluted by rain at her left arm, and fear on her face so naked that for a second I did not recognize her. Renata Kane had been beautiful at 16 in a way that made adults forgive her before she asked, and cruel in a way that made children learn new shapes of silence. At 25, she was still beautiful. The cruelty was gone from her expression, or hidden under something worse. Inez, she said through the door, and my name in her mouth still knew where every old bruise lived. I opened the door as far as the chain allowed and said, "Absolutely not." It was not my most compassionate sentence, but compassion had never paid rent or undone history. Her lashes trembled. She looked past me into my apartment, then back at my face. No smile. In high school, Renata had smiled before every execution, a small polished curve that told the room she had already won, and the rest of us were only learning the result. "I need help," she said. "Then call your father," I told her. "He owns half the men who pretend to answer emergencies in this city." Her mouth tightened around a shiver. "He is the emergency." I almost closed the door. I actually moved to do it, and the chain scraped with a sound that should have ended everything. Then she whispered, "Please," and there was nothing practiced in it. I knew fear when I saw it. Poverty had taught me. Organized crime had taught me. St. Agatha's Preparatory Academy had taught me too, though it had hidden the lesson under uniforms, scholarship plaques, and girls like Renata making jokes about my coat. I stared at her bleeding arm, at the hallway behind her, at the cheap carpet outside my door. "Who followed you?" I asked. "I don't know." "Try again." "I lost one car near Hawthorne." "There may have been another. I came on foot the last 6 blocks." "You are insane." "Yes." That was the first honest thing she gave me, and I hated that it mattered. I unlatched the chain. "One night," I said. "You step inside, you tell me what happened, and at sunrise, you become someone else's problem." She crossed the threshold like a ghost who had forgotten she was not invited. My apartment was narrow and overheated, with books stacked where furniture should have been, and a kitchen table that served as desk, dining room, war room, and occasionally laundry annex. Renata dripped rain onto my rug and looked absurdly wrong among the thrifted mugs and unpaid bills. Under the wet coat, she wore a gray silk blouse torn at the sleeve, black trousers, and shoes designed for being seen, not running through alleys. "Bathroom," I said. "Towels under the sink. Touch anything else and I invoice you." A faint flicker moved across her face. She remembered my voice. Maybe. Dry, precise, mean enough to keep pity away. Back then I had learned to use it too late. By the time I knew how to make people bleed back, Renata had already written herself into me. She did not move toward the bathroom. I didn't know where else to go. "You said that." I mean, I didn't know who else might hate my father enough to help me and hate me enough not to hand me back. That was the second smart thing she said. I locked the door, checked the deadbolt twice, and pointed to the chair. Sit. She sat at my kitchen table, and the sight of her there made memory rise like dirty water. The first memory was the cafeteria, because humiliation likes bright rooms. I was 16, wearing the same thrifted brown jacket for the second winter because my mother said wool lasted if you respected it. And Renata leaned over my table with 3 girls behind her like a jury. Maybe if you washed that thing, Varro, it wouldn't smell like desperation, she said, and everyone laughed because Renata's last name gave people permission. I had stared down at my tray, not because I lacked things to say, but because every response available to a poor girl in a rich school came with interest. Another memory followed before I could stop it. My scholarship essay, printed and taped to my locker, lines highlighted in pink, Renata reading aloud the sentence about my father losing his cab license after refusing to pay a man connected to a city contractor. I want to build a life no one can seize, because a man in a suit decided my family was disposable. She had made the words theatrical, and the hallway had rewarded her. I tore the pages down, with hands so numb the paper cuts did not hurt until later. Now she sat under my kitchen light with blood at her sleeve, and my old anger did not disappear. It sharpened. "Sleeve up," I said, pulling the first aid kit from the cabinet. "Inez, unless your plan is to bleed on my tax documents, sleeve up." She obeyed, which unsettled me more than resistance would have. The cut on her arm was long and shallow, ugly but not fatal. A graze from glass or a knife that had not landed where intended. I put on gloves and cleaned it while she watched my hands with those dark green eyes I had once accused myself of inventing in moments of weakness. Renata's eyes had been the most unfair thing about her. Soft color in a hard face. "This will sting," I said. "I remember." I looked up. "You remember antiseptic?" "I remember you never warned people unless you wanted them to know you were angry." The cotton hovered above her skin. "Do not pretend you know me." Her jaw tightened. "I knew some things." "You knew where to aim." Rain hammered the windows. I pressed antiseptic to the wound. She flinched, but did not pull away. "You made that easy," she said. A laugh escaped me with no humor in it. "Do you want to revise that sentence before I let infection handle you?" "I mean, you showed what hurt you, back then." I was a poor scholarship kid surrounded by bored rich children. That was less a personality flaw than a statistical inevitability. "I know. You do not get to know anything retroactively." Her throat moved. "No, I don't." It was almost an apology, and almost apologies had always offended me. They reached for credit without paying the full bill. I wrapped the wound, threw an old sweatshirt at her, and watched her disappear into the bathroom. While water ran behind the door, I stood by the window and watched the street. The city looked smeared in the rain, neon from the deli bleeding red across the asphalt, trash bags shining like seals along the curb. I had grown up 15 blocks from Dorian Kane's first legitimate business, a funeral home people joked he used with admirable efficiency. By the time Renata and I were in school, Dorian owned clubs, parking lots, a waste management company, 2 judges by rumor, 3 councilmen by behavior, and enough police goodwill to make him invisible. My mother cleaned offices at night in one of his buildings. My father drove cabs until a licensing dispute that was really a protection racket took his medallion and half his voice. We did not say Kane at dinner. We spoke around the name the way families speak around illness. At St. Agatha's, Renata wore that name like armor. Teachers softened, students adjusted, doors opened. When she chose cruelty, people called it charisma. When I resisted, they called it attitude. She came out of the bathroom in my sweatshirt, sleeves swallowing her hands, hair towel-dried into dark waves. Seeing her in my clothes did something unforgivable to the air between us. "Tell me," I said. She sat again. "My father killed someone tonight." The apartment seemed to shrink around the sentence. "Not personally," she added, as if murder improved when delegated. "He gave the order. I heard it. I saw enough." "Who?" "Elias Moore." I knew the name. Everyone who followed dirty money knew it. Deputy Comptroller, Public Smile, Private Habits, rumored to be speaking with federal investigators. A man with 2 calendars, 3 lawyers, and the fatal belief that cleverness could outpace fear. Renata told me she had seen Moore alive in Dorian's office at 9:15, heard him begging at 9:40, heard her father say examples were only useful if people recognized the lesson. At 10:10, Moore was gone, and there was blood on the carpet near the bar. She had found his watch under the couch when her father sent her to fetch a file. "I don't know why I picked it up," she said, "because people in shock pick up stupid evidence." "Yes, and then he saw it in my hand." She described Dorian telling her she was coming home, that he had been patient with her little apartment, little job, little experiment in pretending she was not his daughter. She described his hand closing around her wrist. She described the decanter. "You hit Dorian Kane with a decanter," I said. It was Waterford. "Good to know standards survived." She gave one stunned laugh, and for 1 second, the woman who had run from a monster sat alive in my kitchen. I hated that the laugh warmed anything in me. The warmth died when footsteps stopped outside my door an hour later. Before that, she gave me the flash drive she had stolen from her father's safe, the evidence bag with Moore's watch, and enough fragments to prove danger had not followed her in theory. Then came the hallway voices. A man knocking on Mrs. Alvarez's door, polite as poison. Young woman, dark hair, could be hurt. Families worried. Mrs. Alvarez was 73, suspicious by instinct and experience, and answered with the energy of a saint carrying a baseball bat. At midnight? Her family should worry earlier. I switched off the lamp and pointed Renata toward the shadow beside the bookcase. The men moved to my door next. I opened it on the chain. 2 coats, 1 broad face arranged into apology, 1 narrow, forgettable man whose eyes measured the gap behind my shoulder. "We're looking for a woman," the broad one said. "Do I look like urgent care?" "Dark hair, mid-20s, possibly injured." "I have seen 2 men bothering women in a residential hallway after midnight," I said. "Should I call someone, or do you already have the police on payroll?" Silence sharpened. The broad one slid a card through the gap. "If she turns up." "I won't." "Most people do." I closed the door and stood with my hand on the deadbolt until the footsteps faded. Renata was crying, without sound, in the dark. We hid in the bathroom when a second set of footsteps entered the building. The room was barely large enough for both of us, and in the dark, Renata's sleeve brushed my wrist. Old fear is humiliating because it knows the way home. I was 16 again, trapped in a bathroom stall, while girls outside discussed whether my mother wore a uniform to clean rich people's toilets. Renata's voice had been among them, bright and cool, saying, "Don't be disgusting. Her mother probably cleans offices." The laughter had landed anyway, relief and pain in the same cut. In the bathroom now, her hand found mine. I should have pulled away. I did not. Her fingers were cold and trembling, and the contact was not seduction. It was survival. That made it harder to hate. We stood like that until the hallway settled. When she released me, she whispered, "Thank you." "You do not get to make that sound intimate," I said. I wasn't trying to. "No, you usually succeed without trying." In the dim light from the street, she looked less like a memory than a woman whose fear had finally outrun her pride. "They won't stop," she said. I gathered. "He will send more." "Then one night is no longer intelligent." She looked at me. "Then what?" I listened to the building breathe and made the worst decision of my adult life. "Then we become inconvenient." At 2 a.m, I packed my life into a backpack with the speed of someone who had always suspected leaving might become necessary. Laptop, encrypted drive, cash box, passport, burner phone, 2 shirts, medicine, the folding knife my father gave me when I started taking late trains. Renata watched from the table in my sweatshirt. How did you find my address? I asked. Her guilt had the expensive sourness of wine left open overnight. I hired someone last year. My hands stilled over the cash. You what? To find you, not to bother you, just to know. That sentence is a haunted house. I know. Why? Because I thought about you. Not helping the stalking charge. I thought about what I did, about what you became anyway, about whether you hated me. I did. Her eyes lifted. Past tense? I am tired. Do not get ambitious. She looked down, and the full words arrived quietly. I am sorry. They did not fix anything. They did not even arrive confidently. But they were complete, and some stubborn internal clerk recorded them. We left by the back stairs. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door in a robe the color of old roses, baseball bat in hand, and looked from me to Renata. Trouble? Family matter, I said. I hate those. She handed me banana bread and told Renata. You hurt her again? I still have the bat. Renata said, Yes, ma'am. The city at that hour belonged to delivery trucks, stray cats, and men doing work they would not put on invoices. We moved through service alleys and wet side streets until we reached the garage where I kept my 10-year-old blue Civic under a company name that did not exist outside my paranoia. Renata looked at the car with careful neutrality. Say one rich thing, I warned, and I leave you in the garage. I like it. Terrible liar. I like that it's yours. That shut me up long enough to irritate both of us. We drove out along the old industrial road by the river, warehouses sliding past like dark teeth. She sat low in the passenger seat, hair damp against my sweatshirt. The flash drive in my pocket felt heavier than metal. Did you take Moore's watch? I asked. She produced an evidence bag. Inside was a silver watch with blood dried at the clasp. I panicked intelligently, she said. I also took a flash drive. From where? My father's office safe. You hit him with Waterford, robbed him, stole murder evidence, and came to me. When you put it like that, it sounds impulsive. It sounds suicidal. I didn't have time to workshop it. Despite everything, my mouth curved. She saw the reflection in the window and, wisely, did not comment. The first motel was cash only and smelled of damp carpet, old smoke, and the resigned sadness of people who had made choices after midnight. I paid under a name I had once used in a bankruptcy fraud consultation. The room had 2 beds, bolted art of a lighthouse, and curtains thick enough to qualify as witness protection. I checked the bathroom, window lock, under both beds, behind the shower curtain. Renata watched. You do this often? Hide Mafia daughters in romantic roadside establishments? First time. I copied the flash drive while she showered. The files were organized like a man who believed the world would never reach inside his cabinets. Property transfers, vendor contracts, scans of ledgers, folders labeled Marine, Civic, MISC. In my experience, MISC usually meant felonies with poor naming habits. Moore appeared in 3 spreadsheets tied to a shell consultancy routing municipal bond kickbacks through a youth charity. Of course it was a youth charity. Men like Dorian loved children in brochures. Renata came out barefoot in another borrowed shirt, and the sight of her on that ugly carpet did strange things to proportion. Anything? She asked. A lot. Enough to hurt him. Not enough to finish him. Good, she said, with venom so clean I looked up. Do you mean that? She met my eyes. I have meant it longer than I was brave enough to admit. At 4:38, while Renata slept, I found Northline Recovery. It was paid monthly by 3 legitimate businesses and 1 nonprofit controlled by Moore's office. Northline had no employees, no website, and a bank address in Delaware. It had sent money to a dissolved private security firm whose owner had died in a boating accident despite never having liked water. I leaned back and whispered, Hello, Dorian. Renata stirred. What? Nothing. Sleep. I wasn't. You were making small, tragic noises. I don't make noises. You snore like a haunted duchess. A real smile touched her mouth before reality stole it. You used to do that. Analyze shell companies? Make things funny when they weren't. I closed the laptop halfway. You were usually why they weren't. She accepted it with a slow blink. Yes? Outside, a truck moved through the lot. She sat up too fast, fear taking her body before thought could dress it. The truck passed. She looked furious with herself. I am not good at being afraid. No one is. Some people just have more practice. I thought I did. I studied her then, not as memory or evidence, but as a person with exhaustion bruising the skin beneath her eyes. Because of him, her gaze dropped. Because of everyone who belonged to him. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give without becoming pathetic. By 7, a man in a red hoodie smoked 2 cigarettes near the motel ice machine without ever using it. I noticed him because he noticed nothing too intentionally. Renata noticed because her whole body went rigid. Voss, she whispered. Collections for my father. Collections? A charming euphemism. We left through the bathroom window because the room was on the first floor and the frame had given up years ago. Renata landed in wet grass with surprising competence. Boarding school, she said. Windows were sometimes more reasonable than doors. Every detail I learn about rich education is a felony. We cut behind dumpsters, crossed a drainage ditch, and reached the car near an abandoned diner. In the mirror, the red hoodie appeared at the edge of the lot, phone to his ear. I called Marisol Reed from a burner. Marisol had once laundered money for men who called her brilliant until the FBI called her cooperative. I had helped her keep her sentence suspended and her humor intact. Who died? She answered. Maybe Elias Moore. I am hanging up. I need a place to sit and look at files. If this is Dorian Kane, do not be clever. Clever women become cautionary tales. I have always aspired to be a footnote. Not funny. No, I said, glancing at Renata. It isn't. Marisol sent us to a dry cleaner between a pawn shop and a florist that specialized in funeral arrangements, which felt either coincidental or too honest. Mr. Cho was a narrow man with silver hair and eyes that took inventory without appearing to move. When I said we were there about the velvet curtains, he sighed like favors were a recurring medical condition and gave us the back office. It smelled of steam, starch, cigarettes, and old secrets. I built maps for 3 hours while Renata paced. You know criminals professionally, she said. I know paperwork professionally. Criminals are paperwork with cologne. She paused beside the cracked door, watching plastic-wrapped suits drift by on the rack. My father's Christmas parties smelled like this. Steam, perfume, men pretending not to calculate. I would rather be audited by wolves. You would have hated it, she said, not smiling. Everyone smiled like their teeth belonged to someone else. My father put his hand on my shoulder whenever he introduced me, heavy enough to remind me where I was supposed to stand. He called me his legacy. I used to think that was praise. And then? Then I realized legacies are property with better lighting. I did not answer. The files gave me more useful cruelty. Northline connected to Oriat Holdings, Cobalt Parish, a judge's nephew, 2 city contracts, and a charity chaired by a woman who gave speeches about hope while laundering despair. Mr. Cho brought tea despite saying there was none, then told us men had appeared on Pritchard. 2 in a car, one pretending to buy flowers for no one. He handed me a garment bag. Carry this. What is it? Velvet curtains. Sometimes code is literal. We escaped through a storage room into rain and made it to a diner near the old bus depot, a stainless steel rectangle where the waitress, Gloria, bullied Renata into drinking coffee and placed us in a booth with blind angles. For a while, the diner lent us the illusion of normal life. Trucks hissed past. A man argued with a crossword. Renata wrapped both hands around her mug and stared at toast she did not eat. "You need food," I said. "You sound like a disappointed nurse." "I am a disappointed everything." She tore a corner off the toast. "Did you ever think about leaving the city?" "All the time. Then I remember leaving requires money, a destination, and the optimism to believe geography solves structural decay. Most people would just say no. I invoice by syllable." She smiled into her coffee, and I hated how quickly I noticed. Then she asked, "What was the thing in high school?" "The one you carry most?" The knife in my hand stopped. I could have chosen many things. I chose Lydia Park. Lydia had been my friend for 4 months, which at St. Agatha's was long enough to feel like a miracle. She was a violinist on partial scholarship, shy and brilliant, with ink always smudged on her fingers. We ate lunch together in the courtyard and passed notes about dead monarchs and cafeteria soup. Once, in the library before winter break, she touched my hand under the table and left it there. I did not yet have language for what I was, but my whole body had gone quiet with recognition. After the winter formal, Renata told Celia Markham that Lydia had been seen kissing girls behind the chapel. Celia's mother knew Lydia's mother from church. Within a week, Lydia was withdrawn. She sent me one email from a cousin's account, apologizing for disappearing and saying her mother had taken her phone. I never heard from her again. Renata closed her eyes when I said the name. "I didn't tell her parents." "That is the defense?" "No. I told Celia. I knew it would spread. I did not know it would reach home, but that does not make it less deliberate." "Why?" I asked, too calm. Renata looked at me with no polish left. "Because you looked happy with her. Because she made you laugh in a way I had never heard. Because I wanted that laugh, and I hated that I wanted it. And I knew if my father noticed I wanted anyone like that, he would make her disappear. So I made her disappear first." "That is monstrous," I said. "Yes. You understand that." "Yes." "Your fear does not make it noble." "I know. Protective cruelty is still cruelty." "I know. Stop agreeing like it costs you enough." That broke something across her face. Not tears. Recognition. The kind that arrives too late to save anyone. "I have spent years making my pain sound elegant," she said. "It isn't. It is ugly. I was ugly. I learned from an ugly man and called it survival because that sounded better than admitting I became useful to him." My anger did not leave. It changed temperature. Hot rage became something colder and more durable. She told me she had found Lydia last year in Oregon, married to a woman, teaching music. She had not contacted her. She had only wanted to know whether she had destroyed her completely. "And if you had?" I asked. "I don't know. I think I was afraid to learn there are things apologies cannot reach." "There are." Gloria refilled our coffee without comment. When she left, Renata pushed her toast toward me like an offering from a country without diplomacy. "I am still angry," I said. "I would be afraid of you if you weren't." "You should be afraid anyway." "I am," she said, "but not for the same reasons." Desire arrived then, inconvenient and alive, asking what I planned to do with a body that remembered both harm and hunger. At dark, we went back into the city for leverage, because intelligence is sometimes arrogance wearing better shoes. The files pointed to the Lark, a club closed for renovations after a suspicious kitchen fire that somehow spared the office and the liquor. Renata knew the service entrance code. "My father used to bring me here before it opened," she whispered in the alley. "When I was little, I thought clubs slept during the day." Inside, without music and bodies, the place looked like what it was, a room designed to make people confuse spending with freedom. We picked the office lock, found a wall safe behind a framed photograph of Dorian shaking hands with a former mayor, and opened it with Renata's birthday, because patriarchy and lack of imagination often share a drawer. Inside were cash stacks, passports, a hard drive, and a folder labeled RC. The folder held surveillance photographs of Renata outside apartments, bookstores, cafes. Notes in a careful hand. Female. Unknown. Too close. Subject emotional. Remind RC of obligations. The room tilted. He watched you, I said. Yes. All this time. Yes. I thought of high school glances cut away too quickly, cruelty arriving after kindness like a door slammed between rooms. Take it, I said. She looked at me. Take the folder. She did. Then I connected the hard drive and waited for the transfer bar to crawl while voices entered below. We had maybe 4 minutes. I wanted the data so badly I forgot that obsession and courage are not twins, only cousins who resemble each other in bad light. Men came upstairs. Renata told me to unplug. I watched the transfer. 52%, 68. Boots in the hall. A shoulder hit the office door. She dragged me toward the window and the fire escape, and the chair under the handle skidded as the door burst open behind us. We ran down metal stairs, slick with rain. Halfway down my foot, slipped. Pain shot up my shin, and Renata caught me hard around the waist, nearly taking us both over the railing. For one breath, we hung there, bodies locked, rain on our faces, her mouth inches from mine. Move, she gasped. At the bottom of the alley, the narrow man from my building waited. Miss Kane, he said, your father is worried. He should be, Renata replied. He said Dorian wanted her alive and had no preference about me. I felt offended by the accuracy. He reached into his coat. I threw Mr. Cho's garment bag at his face. Velvet curtains exploded across him. Renata swung a broken bottle at his wrist. The gun clattered. I kicked it under a dumpster and slammed my backpack into his knee with every ounce of scholarship resentment I had stored. Then we ran until the subway swallowed us. On the train, adrenaline turned into rage. Renata's bandage had opened, and my shin throbbed like a second heart. Do not stand in front of armed men for me, I said. He said he didn't need you alive. Yes, and I found that personally rude, but my point stands. What did you expect me to do? Follow instructions. Instructions that ended with leaving you? You do not get to decide my risk. You decided mine when you took me in. That is different. Because you are the only person allowed to be brave? No, because you have a habit of making choices that hurt people and calling them protection. The words hit before I knew why. At the second motel, uglier than the first and equipped with only one bed, the missing piece surfaced. She had called her cousin Nico from a payphone at the diner while I was in the restroom. He had promised years ago that if she ever needed to get out, he would help. Instead, Voss found us. Men appeared at Pritchard, and the club search came too neatly timed. You risked my life, I said. Yes, she said, raw and shaking. And I am sorry. Not because sorry changes the alley. Because for 1 second, I understood what it is to be the danger someone else brought home. She told me then, in that second motel room that smelled of burning dust and old smoke, about the shape of her cage. At 12, her father fired a piano teacher because the woman hugged her after a recital and made Renata cry. He said people who got sentimental forgot their place. At 15, he watched where her eyes went at parties, asked if she was becoming confused because she laughed too freely at a girl's joke, said confusion could be corrected. Then I noticed you, Renata said. Noticed is too small. You were furious and brilliant, and you looked at the world like you had caught it lying. You hated me, which was inconvenient because I wanted you to keep looking. I made you hate me harder because hatred looked safer than want. So you ruined me first. Yes. You ruined Lydia first. Yes. You made me feel dirty for being poor. Yes. And all this time, you thought one day you would explain and I would admire the tragic architecture? No, I thought you would never know. I thought I would carry it and deserve the carrying. Convenient. Yes. I sat with the anger until it settled behind my ribs. Not gone. Less likely to drive. Then I got the first aid kit. Sit down. Inez. Your wound opened. Sit down before you bleed on the carpet and improve it. I cleaned and rewrapped her arm in silence. This time she watched my face instead of the wound. What? I asked. I keep thinking, she said, that I would have loved your hands even if they never touched me kindly. The bandage tightened under my fingers. She inhaled. So did I. Do not say things like that in rooms where I am deciding whether to murder you. I thought honesty was required. Honesty is not a suicide pact. We did not sleep for another hour. I sent a message to Special Agent Lena Ortiz, a federal contact who had once used my analysis in a procurement fraud case, and told me never to contact her unless I had something large enough to ruin her weekend. I attached the file map, the watch photo, and one sentence. Dorian Kane has a body problem and a money problem. I can prove the second faster. Then I sat on the floor beside Renata, not touching. Why are you still here? She asked. The true answer had too many parts. Because Dorian needed to fall. Because she had evidence. Because men had knocked on my door. Because the girl who hurt me had once saved me from Martin Vale in a hallway and spent 10 years pretending she had not. I said, because leaving now would irritate me. Her hand moved across the carpet, stopped halfway between us. I placed mine beside hers, close enough for our smallest fingers to touch. That was the first quiet hour. Before we continue, a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, so some of the more passionate and intimate scenes between these two women have been softened or shortened. The full, uncensored version, with every private moment left intact, is available on my Patreon. If you want to experience the complete story the way it was written, the link is in the description below. Morning came gray through the curtains, and my burner held Ortiz's reply. If half of this is real, do not move without telling me. If this is a trap, I will haunt your audit trail. I wrote back that local police were compromised and the package was not complete. Ortiz asked me to define complete. I looked at Renata. How close can we get to your father's financial nerve center? She sat up slowly. That depends how committed you are to dying. The answer was a law office downtown, Kane, Wexler, and Brandt, where Dorian's attorney kept private records in a 9th-floor room behind his office. Renata had seen it at 21 after telling her father she wanted to move out. He showed her shelves of files and said every life in the city had a paper version, and paper versions were easier to correct. We need that room, I said. No, we need to give Ortiz what we have and run. It may not be enough. It is enough to make him angry. He is already angry. It is enough to make him desperate. Good, desperate men make mistakes. Dead women do not benefit from them. We stared at each other until honesty entered the room. If we go, she said, we use what you know about money and what I know about the cage. Both, or we die separately from pride. It was an excellent argument. I hated it immediately. We planned in the motel room like the world's least stable consulting firm. Renata sketched the law office on the back of a takeout menu. Service elevator, reception glass, Wexler's office, records room, stair alarms, camera angles, cleaning staff between 7:30 and 9. Wexler drank scotch in his office until 8 on Thursdays because his wife hosted a book club he hated. How do you know that? I asked. His mistress complained at brunch. Organized crime is just gossip with casualties. We argued about elevators, stairs, badges, and whether my leg could handle 6 flights. She brought me an ice bucket wrapped in a towel and knelt in front of me. Give me your ankle. No. Inez. I do not trust medical care from former villains. Current morally compromised love interest, perhaps. The sentence landed and left us both still. She looked down. I did not mean to say it like a joke. My mouth went dry. Renata. You do not have to respond. I know attraction does not absolve harm. I know I am not safe just because I am sorry. But if we are dead by tomorrow, I would like at least one honest thing to have existed between us. I could have deflected. Instead, I said, "You were never just what you did to me. That was part of the problem." She absorbed it like a hand to the chest. I gave her my ankle. She held the ice there with surprising gentleness. At 7:20, we entered the office tower through the underground parking garage, wearing black slacks, white shirts, and the dead-eyed exhaustion of cleaning staff. The vendor badge worked because bureaucracy is the hole through which many empires leak. The service elevator hummed upward. Renata stood beside me, calm enough to worry me. "After this," she said, "if we survive, I want to write Lydia. To apologize? To give her the choice to ignore me. That may be the only decent answer." The elevator opened on 9. The law office was glass, walnut, and moral rot. At reception, the city glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as if beauty could launder anything. We slipped through the service hall. Wexler's office door was open, voices inside. Wexler's oily irritation, then Dorian on speaker. "You told me the records were secure." "They are," Wexler said. "Your daughter does not have the access or the nerve." Dorian laughed softly. "You never understood my daughter. She has nerve. What she lacks is discipline." Renata's hand found the wall. I wanted to touch her back, and did not. Wexler said they should move the sensitive material tonight. Dorian said he had sent men. Renata looked at me, and the plan became smaller, sharper, immediate. The records room keypad rejected Renata's first 2 codes. "Breathe," I whispered. "He changed it," she said. "Wexler is a lawyer. Try his birthday, his mistress's birthday, or a number that makes him feel clever." She typed 0704, green. "Independence Day?" I mouthed. "He calls himself a patriot when drunk." "I hate this country." The records room smelled of paper, toner, and climate-controlled sins. Shelves lined the walls. Renata went straight to a cabinet at the back. I picked the lock while she watched the door. Inside were red folders. Kane Private, Kane Strategic, RC Contingencies. My stomach twisted. I found Dorian's handwritten ledger in a black binder with no title. Men like him never trusted computers completely. They trusted paper because paper could burn. I scanned pages while Renata opened her contingency file. She handed me a proposed marriage contract, a business alliance with the Vale family. Her name typed beside Martin Vale's. The hallway behind the auditorium returned. Martin cornering me, Renata appearing, her voice bored and fatal as she mentioned his uncle. "He was going to marry you to him," I said. "When I turned 18, I threatened to throw myself off the balcony at the engagement dinner." She looked at the page. "That day, behind the auditorium, I saw him near you. He had no right to touch someone I was already hurting." A scanner beep betrayed us. Wexler shouted for the records room, and the hallway filled with feet. I shoved the binder into my bag. Renata grabbed the contingency folder, and we ran through a secondary door that chirped a warning alarm. Down the stairwell, 2 floors, 3, my leg burning. Men entered below. We burst out onto the 6th floor into a dark accounting firm, full of sleeping monitors and cubicles that looked like cardboard tombstones. A shot cracked behind us, suppressed and still monstrous, starring the glass wall beside my head. The freight elevator arrived with the cruel leisure of machinery. Renata shoved me inside, slammed the close button, and as the doors shut, her hand pressed to my chest to confirm I was intact. She pulled back. "Sorry. Stop apologizing for checking whether I am dead. I am trying to track categories." The elevator opened into the loading dock, and Ortiz's timing was better than my judgment. Unmarked cars skidded into the alley. Federal agents moved like a door closing. Ortiz stepped out, compact, silver at the temples, expression set to disappointed thunder. "Inez Varro," she said. You are a catastrophe. I brought documents. You brought a Mafia princess and a felony. Alleged. Renata lifted her chin. My name is Renata Kane. I witnessed my father order Elias Moore's death. I have evidence. I will give a statement. Ortiz looked at her and said, Get in the car. The next 12 hours belonged to fluorescent rooms, sealed bags, recorded statements, and coffee so bad it deserved sentencing. Federal buildings make terror procedural. Renata gave her statement first, while I watched through glass. She sat with her posture straight, hands folded, and said her father's name without flinching. She described Moore alive, Moore begging, the blood on the carpet, the watch, the decanter, the men sent after her, the surveillance, the marriage contract. She did not make herself look clean. That mattered to me more than I wanted it to. When it was my turn, I walked Ortiz through Northline Recovery, Oriat Holdings, Cobalt Parish, the youth charity, the judge's nephew, the maintenance invoice at the Lark, Wexler's records, Dorian's handwritten ledger. Ortiz interrupted, asked dates, asked how I had obtained certain files, sighed when I used phrases like arguably accessible, and finally rubbed the bridge of her nose. I should arrest you for half of this. Only half? I'm losing my edge. You are not funny. People keep saying that on the most stressful days of my life. She looked through the glass at Renata, alone with a paper cup of water. She is not safe. I know. Neither are you. I have been doing some analysis in that area. This evidence lets us move, Ortiz said. It does not erase Dorian Kane overnight. Ortiz placed us in a safe apartment 2 counties over, a third-floor unit furnished in government beige, stocked with groceries chosen by someone who believed black pepper was a lifestyle risk. Renata stood in the living room and looked lost. You can leave, she said. That is an interesting opening. You should. They can keep you somewhere separate, safer. You have done enough. Have I? Yes. Are you saying this because you want me safe, or because you want to make the decision before I can? Her shoulders stiffened. I crossed the room slowly. We discussed this. She turned. I want you to stay, and I hate myself for wanting it, because wanting has never made anything safer. I want you in the next room. I want to hear you complain about the coffee. I want to sit beside you without turning it into strategy. And because I want that, every instinct tells me to push you away before someone notices. But pushing you away is how I became someone who hurt you. So I am telling the truth and giving you the choice. There are moments that look small from outside and enormous from within. A woman by a window, a parking lot, government furniture. The terrible intimacy of being offered a choice by someone who once stole so many. I am angry, I said. I will be angry tomorrow. This is not absolution. No. If I stay, it is because the present is also true. She asked if she could touch me. The question entered deeper than a kiss could have because it did not pretend the past had vanished. It stepped around it carefully. Yes, I said. She took my hand and nothing more. We stood in that beige room while the heat clicked on and a car passed below. I have never said it, she whispered. I knew what she meant. My pulse did too. You do not have to say it to me. I do. Not as a demand, not as a claim. As a fact I kept buried so long it started poisoning everything around it. I loved you when I was too frightened and twisted to understand love as anything but a threat. I loved you badly. I loved you cruelly. That is not romantic. It is the worst truth about me. But I am trying to learn how to love without making it hurt. My throat closed. Some reckless part of me wanted to say it back. But love, for me, had always arrived tied to cost. My parents loved and lost sleep. Lydia touched my hand and vanished. Renata loved and called it protection, while I learned to flinch. I can't say that yet, I said. I know. Do you? She smiled a little through wet eyes. I am improving with that sentence. I laughed, and the laugh shook something loose in me. We slept in separate rooms that night. It was my decision. She accepted it without wounded pride. Progress sometimes looks like a door left open only after someone asks. In the days that followed, Dorian's world began making the noises of a building settling before collapse. Wexler was detained. A police captain developed sudden memory after learning his retirement accounts were under review. Northline's bank records led to an accountant in Maryland who had kept copies of everything because even criminals distrust payroll. Elias Moore's body was found in a warehouse Dorian did not technically own, which meant he owned it in the only ways that mattered. Then, Ortiz arrived with coffee that was not terrible, and I knew the news was bad. Dorian had disappeared before the warrant team reached his house. Renata knew who might know the contingency route: Nico. Ortiz had picked him up that morning, sweating through an expensive suit. He would only talk to Renata. On the secure call, Renata's voice was calmer than mine would have been. "You gave me up," she said. Nico said he did not know they were watching. "Do not waste my time with purity. Where is my father?" He said family. Renata laughed quietly. Family is the word he uses when he wants obedience to sound holy. He gave up the old marina at Marrow Point. Before ending the call, she said, "When this is over, do not call me again." Dorian was arrested that night with 2 passports, 3 watches, a case of cash, and the expression of a man shocked to discover weather applied to him. His arrest did not end the danger. Men like Dorian are not storms that pass. They are weather systems with investments. But something enormous shifted. The city exhaled by inches. News anchors learned to say Northline recovery as if they understood shell companies. Politicians expressed concern with the grave faces of people checking whether cameras could see their panic. Renata watched the coverage on mute. When her father's mugshot appeared, she stared for a long time. "I thought I would feel free." "What do you feel?" "Tired, sad, angry that I am sad." "That sounds human. My condolences." Her mouth trembled. "He is my father." "Yes." "He is a monster." "Yes." "I wanted him to love me." "Yes." The third yes broke her, not loudly. She bent forward like someone had cut a string in her spine, and the first sob tore out of her with surprise. I moved before thinking, sat beside her, and opened my arms. She came into them like someone falling through a door. I held her while she cried for the man who built the cage, the girl who mistook bars for inheritance, the harm she had done with the tools he gave her. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "No," I said. She went still. "You don't deserve comfort as a prize. That is not what this is. Sometimes people are held so they can stop making everyone else pay for the fact that they are bleeding." Weeks passed in strange layers. Renata entered formal protection as a cooperating witness. I became a consultant attached to the financial side of the case, which meant I got a badge that opened 3 doors and irritated 7 attorneys. We lived separately for a while because I insisted on it. She accepted that too. She found a therapist who specialized in coercive control and family systems. I returned to mine after 3 years of pretending spreadsheets counted as emotional processing. Hers gave homework about naming fear before turning it into strategy. Mine gave homework about letting anger exist without renting it my entire nervous system. We met twice a week in places Ortiz approved, and once in a bookstore neither of us told Ortiz about, which I justified as civil disobedience, and Renata called reckless with the fondness of a hypocrite. In the back corner by the poetry shelves, she brought 2 coffees and said she had written Lydia an apology. She had not brought it for me to approve because, she said, that would make me responsible for her conscience. "Good realization," I said. "I am going to send it tonight." If she does not answer, then she does not answer. If she tells you to burn in hell, I will consider it a fair travel suggestion. I almost smiled. You are getting funnier. I had a good teacher. Do not blame me for your personality. Months later, Lydia replied. Renata showed me the email only after asking. It was short. Lydia had built a good life, remembered everything, appreciated the apology, and did not want further contact. It ended. I hope you both become better than what happened to us. I read the line 3 times. Renata read it once and cried in the bathroom with the door unlocked. Progress is sometimes an unlocked door. The case crawled forward. Dorian stayed in custody after a judge decided his fondness for boats and alternate passports made him a flight risk. Wexler negotiated. Men who had called loyalty a virtue began discovering the spiritual clarity of plea agreements. My analysis became exhibits, and Ortiz smiled once in court when the prosecutor said forensic clarity, which I treasured like evidence of a rare bird. Renata testified before a grand jury, came home pale and furious because fear had not killed her, and stood in my apartment kitchen while I chopped garlic. You are aggressive with that knife, she said. Garlic knows what it did. She wore a green sweater that made her eyes impossible. Her hair was shorter now, cut below her jaw because she wanted to recognize herself from the back. My mother wants to meet you, I said. Renata went still. Your mother? She noticed the antioxidant articles were not addressing my emotional availability. What did you tell her? That I am seeing someone. Seeing. Occasionally across rooms, under federal supervision, very modern. I told my mother Renata's name. Renata gripped the counter. What did she say? She said Cain like she was checking a bruise. Then she asked whether you were kind to me. What did you say? I put down the knife. I said, you are learning. I also said I am learning. That Sunday, my mother interrogated her with soup and fed her enough to make resistance useless. Renata brought daisies from a grocery store, carefully unexpensive, and looked so nervous at the door that my mother softened before pretending not to. Afterward, Renata and I walked back to my apartment in rain. She washed dishes because she liked tasks with visible endings. I dried. Our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. Do you remember the first night? She asked. I remember considering closing the door. You should have. Yes. I am glad you didn't. So far. She handed me a plate. Still angry? I thought about it. Sometimes. Today? Less. She accepted the gift without grabbing for more. When the dishes were done, we stood by the sink with the light above us and the rest of the apartment dim. The moment had been circling us for months. We had touched, held hands, slept in separate rooms, and cried in public bathrooms. But we had not kissed. Not really. Anything before trust would have felt like theft from both of us. Renata looked at my mouth, then back into my eyes. May I? The old Renata would have taken. The old me might have dared her to, then punished us both for wanting it. The women we had become stood in a kitchen with wet hands and the ghosts of our younger selves watching from the corners. Yes, I said. She stepped closer, slow enough for refusal. Her hand rose to my cheek and stopped just before touching until I leaned into it. Her palm was warm. She kissed me like a question she had spent 10 years learning how to ask. Soft at first, almost trembling, mouth barely brushing mine. I could have kept it gentle. I did not. I caught the front of her sweater and pulled her closer, and the sound she made against my lips broke through the last careful distance between us. Heat moved through me, not clean or simple, but alive, threaded with anger, grief, relief, and the strange sweetness of arriving late to something still waiting. Her hand slid into my hair. Mine found her waist. We kissed until the rain and the case and the past all became part of the same breath. Not gone, never gone, but no longer standing between our mouths. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. Inez. No speeches, I whispered. I was going to say thank you. Tab, she laughed, and I kissed the laugh because I could, because choice had entered the room and stayed. The future did not become easy after that. It became chosen, which is harder and better. Dorian's trial took more than a year to begin. Renata testified for 2 days and threw up in the courthouse bathroom after the first, then went back in on the second, wearing a black suit and a face like winter sunlight. I sat behind the prosecution table with my financial exhibits, watching men who had once seemed untouchable discover that power could be itemized, frozen, subpoenaed, and taken apart. My mother watched the news and called to ask if Renata was eating. Mrs. Alvarez kept the bat by her door and once told an agent that federal shoes were too loud for hallway work. Lydia did not contact us again. We respected that. Sometimes respect is the apology continuing after words end. Renata and I fought. Of course we fought. She still tried to solve fear by controlling variables. I still sharpened pain into jokes and pretended surprise when they cut. Sometimes I woke angry from dreams set in high school hallways. Sometimes she woke silent from dreams where her father's hand rested on her shoulder. We learned to say, "That sounded like then," and "This is now," and "I need a minute before I make this worse." None of it was elegant. Most healing is admin work with occasional miracles. On the anniversary of the night she knocked, Rain returned to the city with theatrical loyalty. We stood under the awning outside my building, grocery bags in our hands, while Mrs. Alvarez leaned from her window and shouted that if Renata planned to bleed on my rug again, she should bring better wine. Renata promised she had improved her guest etiquette. Mrs. Alvarez said the bat was still available. Inside, my apartment was warm. The radiator clanked. My desk held 3 active cases, 2 unpaid bills, and a framed photograph my mother had taken at Sunday dinner without warning us. In it, Renata was laughing at something off camera, my hand visible near hers on the table. Not touching. Almost. Proof of a moment before a choice. Renata set the groceries down and turned to me. Her hair was damp from the rain. Her eyes were still the most unfair thing about her. But now when she looked at me, I did not see only the girl who hurt me or the woman who arrived bleeding at my door. I saw the whole terrible map, the damage, the trying, the courage that came late but came anyway. "Do you ever regret opening the door?" she asked. I took off my coat, considered lying, and decided against it. "Sometimes," she nodded, pain flickering but not defensiveness. "Okay. Do you regret knocking?" "No." In those first protected weeks, I learned Renata in details that had never fit inside hatred. She hated sleeping with the closet door open because her father's house had too many silent rooms and too many men entering without knocking. She drank tea until noon, then coffee like a confession. She read contracts the way other people read weather, scanning for traps before beauty. She did not like being called brave, because bravery sounded too clean to describe the frightened bargains that had kept her alive. I learned that she hummed when she was concentrating, and stopped the instant she realized I could hear. I learned that apology, when it is real, is repetitive work. It does not stand in the doorway with flowers and wait to be admired. It washes dishes, attends therapy, answers hard questions without becoming the victim of them, and accepts silence without demanding reward. She learned me too, though I resisted the idea on principle. She learned not to touch my shoulder from behind. She learned that jokes about money made my face close before my voice did. She learned that when I said I was fine, the correct response was not comfort, but a raised eyebrow and time. The city also changed in ways too small for news. A bartender who had paid cane men for 11 years gave a statement and then cried because the envelope in his register stayed full for the first time in a decade. A contractor sent Ortiz 3 boxes of invoices and a note that said he had daughters. My mother called to say one of the women in her building had finally reported a landlord who used Dorian's name as a threat, then added that I should eat more lentils because stress emptied the blood. Fear did not vanish. It redistributed. People tested doors. People spoke lower at first, then less low. Every time someone used the past tense about Dorian's power, I felt suspicious of grammar and grateful for it anyway. Renata watched those shifts with an expression I came to know well. Grief braided with relief. She had wanted him gone. She had also spent her life orbiting him. When a planet disappears, even escape has vertigo. One evening, Ortiz brought me a box of copied ledgers and told me not to look triumphant. I told her I never looked triumphant, only undercaffeinated with purpose. She said that if I committed one more arguably accessible evidence acquisition, she would staple my ethics to a subpoena. Renata, sitting at the kitchen table of the safe apartment with a mug of tea between both hands, said very seriously that staples were better than handcuffs. Ortiz stared at her, then at me, and muttered that criminals' daughters and freelance accountants deserved each other. After she left, Renata asked whether that had been affection. From Ortiz, yes, I said. That was practically a blessing. Renata smiled, and the room brightened by one unscientific degree. It frightened me, how quickly her smile could alter the weather inside me. Want had always made me suspicious. Want connected the body to hope, and hope had been an unreliable landlord. But suspicion did not stop warmth from arriving. It only made me document it. The first time Renata saw my childhood neighborhood after Dorian's arrest, she asked me to drive slowly. I almost said no. I almost said the streets did not need rich girl grief touring them like a museum. Then I saw her face and understood she was not looking for absolution. She was trying to see the city without her father standing between her and every consequence. We passed the corner where my father used to park his cab, the bodega that had changed owners 3 times, the church basement where my mother once waited for a rent assistance appointment that ended with a pamphlet and no money. Renata did not speak until we reached the old funeral home, with the Kane name scraped from the sign after federal seizure. I thought buildings were neutral, she said. When I was little, I thought if they were pretty, they were good. I thought if I became smart enough, I could not be hurt, I said. She looked at me. Did it work? Occasionally, with poor margins. She almost laughed, then reached across the car and placed her hand palm up on the console. I took it for 3 red lights. There were days when I could not stand her kindness. That is the embarrassing truth. Cruel Renata had a place in my mind with walls and labels. Trying Renata moved the furniture. She would ask before touching me. She would listen when I said a memory had surfaced like a body in shallow water. She would apologize without collapsing, and some ancient part of me would want to punish her for not being easier to hate. My therapist called this complexity. I called it expensive. Still, I kept going. So did Renata. She told me once that therapy felt like being audited by someone with better questions. I said that sounded excellent. She said I would enjoy emotional discovery if it came with pivot tables. I told her not to flirt with me using data structures unless she meant it. The silence after that was not safe exactly. It was something better than safe. It was chosen. We sat on opposite ends of a government couch and looked at each other like the room had become a matchbook. When Renata finally sent Lydia the apology, she did not sleep. She made tea, poured it out, made coffee, forgot to drink it, then cleaned the safe apartment bathroom with the dedication of a woman attempting to sanitize regret. I let her. At 2 a.m, she stood in the kitchen doorway and asked whether no answer was a kind of answer. I said yes. She nodded and looked smaller, then taller, as if accepting a consequence had altered her posture. I used to think accountability meant punishment, she said. Now I think sometimes it means being left alone with the fact that you cannot fix what you did. I closed my laptop. That is a brutal sentence for 2 a.m. I am trying to be concise. Never trust concision. It hides fees. She smiled faintly. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted not to. Both feelings stood in me without canceling each other. Finally, I said, "You can sit here if you do not need me to make it better." She sat. We listened to the refrigerator hum. Nothing became better. It became bearable. Sometimes that is the honest version. During trial preparation, prosecutors loved timelines almost as much as I did, which proved that even institutions occasionally develop taste. We built the case hour by hour, transfer by transfer, invoice by invoice. Dorian's empire looked less mythical when pinned to paper. It became dates, authorizations, shell names, signatures, cash deposits, maintenance orders, payments disguised as consulting fees. Evil, translated into administrative habits, loses some glamour and gains weight. Renata hated the ledger pages most when her father's handwriting appeared. She said it was the same hand that signed her school forms, birthday cards, and the note on the piano teacher's dismissal. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Silence, when chosen carefully, can be a hand held out without touching. After a while, she said, "I used to think his handwriting was beautiful." I said, "It is." She looked at me sharply. Bad men can have good penmanship. That is why civilization is complicated. She laughed, and the laugh did not betray the grief. It carried it. My mother's first dinner with Renata deserved its own legal transcript. She opened the door, looked Renata up and down, accepted the daisies, and said, "Grocery store flowers. Good. You are not trying to bribe me." Renata replied, "I was warned against hostage apology flowers." My mother looked at me. She listens. That is something. Dinner included lentil soup, roast chicken, 3 questions about therapy, 2 about federal security, 1 about whether Renata intended to make my life harder than I already made it myself, and a long silence when Renata answered, "I have. I am trying not to again." My mother did not forgive her. Mothers do not outsource their daughters' wounds to politeness. But later, while I washed plates, I heard her tell Renata in the living room, "Learning is good. Continuing is better." Renata said, "Yes, ma'am." My mother said, "And eat more. You look like Worry learned to walk." Renata cried in the cab afterward, quietly, and when I asked why, she said, she sounded angry and kind at the same time. I said, "That is the Varro family dialect." Physical closeness came in increments, because I needed it that way, and Renata had learned that need was not rejection. A hand at the small of my back while crossing a street, removed before it became assumption. Her shoulder against mine during a deposition break, warm and steady. My fingers in her hair one night when a nightmare left her shaking, not to claim her, but to call her back to the room. Each contact had to survive memory. Each contact had to prove it was not a trap, not a performance, not a debt coming due. Desire grew anyway, stubborn as weeds through concrete. Sometimes I would catch her watching me over a file, not hungry in the old predatory sense, but astonished, as if tenderness were a language she had studied from contraband books and only now heard spoken aloud. Sometimes she caught me looking back. I would say something about margins or subpoenas. She would say, "Of course." We became experts at not naming the heat until naming it became the only honest thing left. I also learned that safety could be boring, and boring could be holy. The safe apartment had terrible art and a kettle that screamed like a tiny, corrupt official. We bought better coffee after I threatened to make Ortiz drink the government kind herself. Renata found a plant at a corner store and named it Probable Cause because it looked suspicious but promising. We argued about where to place it. I said near light. She said not too much light. The plant survived despite both of us, which felt symbolic in a way I refused to encourage. On quiet afternoons, she read witness preparation notes while I traced money through accounts designed to make decency give up. The domesticity of it should have been absurd. Maybe it was. 2 women surrounded by federal paperwork, trying to keep a plant alive and a case intact. One of them learning not to flinch at kindness, the other learning not to mistake vulnerability for an unlocked door. We failed regularly. We tried again. Trying again became the shape of us. There was one afternoon, months after Dorian's arrest, when Renata asked to see St. Agatha's from the outside. The school stood behind iron gates and manicured hedges, still convinced of its own virtue. I parked across the street and left the engine running. Students in pressed uniforms crossed the courtyard with the careless misery of the protected. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Renata said, "I thought if I could control the room could not expose me." I looked at the chapel windows, the steps where Lydia had once laughed into her scarf, the side door near the auditorium. I thought if I could survive the room, it meant the room had not changed me. "Did it?" she asked. "Yes," she nodded. "Me too." We sat with that, not because it was comforting, but because it was honest. Before we left, she opened the car window and let the cold air in. "I am sorry," she said, not as a grand statement, not as theater, but as weather. "I know," I answered. This time the phrase did not sound empty. It sounded like a ledger entry made in the right column. There are loves that arrive like rescue and loves that arrive like weather. Ours arrived like evidence dragged from a locked room, water damaged, incomplete, damning, impossible to ignore. It did not prove innocence. It proved truth. Truth was not always clean enough to save you. Sometimes it simply gave you the first honest place to stand. I did not forgive Renata all at once. I do not think forgiveness, the real kind, works like a door that opens and stays open forever. It is more like choosing, again and again, not to make the wound your only home. Some days I chose easily. Some days I chose with my teeth clenched. Renata did the same with fear. She chose not to turn love into leverage. She chose not to disappear behind cruelty. She chose to stay when staying meant being seen without armor. That night, rain slid down the windows and blurred the city into silver. Renata stood in my kitchen, alive and uncertain and mine only in the ways a person can be when ownership has been replaced by trust. I kissed her first, not because the past had softened, because the present had earned its own mouth. She smiled against me, surprised and not surprised, and when her arms came around my waist, they did not feel like a cage. They felt like someone learning the shape of shelter. Outside, the city kept its old secrets and began making new confessions. Upstairs, Mrs. Alvarez's television murmured. Somewhere, federal files grew heavier. Somewhere, Dorian Kane sat behind locked doors, discovering that money could still move, but not always fast enough to outrun a woman with a ledger. In my apartment, for that small, stubborn hour, there was rain, warmth, the smell of garlic from dinner, and Renata's hand in mine. The future ahead of us was uncertain. It had always been. Safety was not a place we reached and retired inside. It was a practice. A ledger balanced daily. A door opened carefully, not because the world had become harmless, but because we had learned to ask who stood on the other side. When Renata whispered my name this time, it did not sound like a weapon or a plea. It sounded like a choice. I answered by holding on,